Okay, well, welcome to the March 25th, 2022 meeting of the Rural Resilience and Adaptation Subcommittee of the Vermont Climate Council. We will get started. We've got the agenda on the website, as well as some meeting materials that Marianne posted there. And so we'll do a quick review of the agenda. Also note that the meeting minutes from our last meeting in January is posted in or is linked in the agenda. After we kind of say hi and catch up here for a minute, we'll go into task group updates on the Municipal Vulnerability Index and Climate Toolkit, and that'll be led by the task group members. Then we'll be talking about subcommittee nominations for additional subcommittee members for our fun group, and then we'll kick it over to Jane and any other subcommittee members that have legislative updates to share, and then we'll open up for public comment and adjourn. Does anybody have anything that they would like to make sure gets covered, or any additions to the agenda today? No? Okay. Alrighty. Well, then why don't we move right into task group updates? And there is on the website, there's the Municipal Vulnerability Index RFP draft posted there, and the Climate Toolkit scope is also posted there. So encourage everybody to take a look at that. And it looks like Jane's also posting it in the chat, so thank you. And okay, so why don't we go to, so Mary, you want me to go to you first?
Well, Municipal Vulnerability Index is up first, so I would go to Jane first.
Okay, Jane. Any updates you have to share on that?
Sure. Nice to see everybody. It's been a long time. So the Municipal Vulnerability Index has a task group associated with it that is largely comprised of folks sitting around the table here at this subcommittee, but also has representation from Just Transitions. Casually touched my mouse and it muted me. So we met once as a task group to largely discuss the work that was done, thanks to Catherine, who is now joining us. Thanks to Catherine, who spoke through and updated that broader group about the work that your subcommittee did over the course of the last year, looking at tools such as Green Mountain Powers and the work of Maine, and then also reviewed the framework for the Municipal Vulnerability Index that the subcommittee put together. We also considered and looked at some of the other tools that Leslie Ann had put forward for us to consider in this space, and then agreed that the best process for us as a task group was for me to take the lead on compiling an RFP, knowing that ultimately that task group would be the ones that oversaw and managed and supported the work of a contractor that would advance the development of this tool. So largely building on the framework that this subcommittee put together and that Catherine shared with us at that meeting, I developed the RFP that was sent out to the task group, and I was really grateful for the feedback that I got from members like Joe and Catherine and Ann Margolis, who are here, as well as Jay Schaefer also gave me some great comments. And so I've updated the Municipal Vulnerability Index RFP based on the comments that I received that really spoke to really being explicit in the considerations for frontline and impacted communities, explicit in the spatial nature of the tool that we wanted to develop, and then how we ultimately wanted that work to be communicated in the presentation of the index being applied to all Vermont municipalities and some of the specifics that we would want to see in that space. So there were great comments and feedback. I think more than happy to open up conversation around anything that's still missing if folks looked at that. But the RFP is somewhat close to final now, barring any additions or comments that from here on out at this meeting. And I met yesterday with our IT folks. We have two RFPs now, one for the development of the measuring and assessing progress database, which I can update you all on also, but that's the two remaining statutory requirements in the GWSA speak to the development of a progress tracking tool, and then speak to the development of the Municipal Vulnerability Index. Both of these have a lot of overlap and consideration with databases, data management, and therefore need to be vetted by the Agency of Digital Services and IT. I met specifically with, for folks who know him, Eric Engstrom yesterday to talk about the Municipal Vulnerability Index and the role that IT might be able to play in that space, but didn't get any clarity really from him on like what IT would or wouldn't want to do. So both of these RFPs are with our ADS director for ANR to review and sort of give me a clear direction on procurement. And I'm hopeful that like they'll still support us putting them out to RFP. And I certainly think that'll be the case with the measuring and assessing progress tool. It's just too big to develop in-house, but there's a chance that the Municipal Vulnerability Index could be something that they decide to develop in-house, and that is okay. And I've not worked with them in that capacity, but I know Jens, for instance, has worked with them on very big data tools and could speak to their capacity in that space. And I know Marion's working closely with Eric on the conversion of the climate action plan to a story map, and he has excellent GIS capabilities and capacity. So I'm not sure what will happen, but the RFPs are ready to roll. They're with ADS. Everything else is all set up. We have the funding. We're ready to move forward with posting. And in an ideal scenario, both of those would go out in the next 1 to 2 weeks so that we could have them posted and RFP proposals in so that we could have them under contract before our business office kind of goes into shutdown for the month of June for end of year. Otherwise, we'd have to hold and wait to put those under contract till the new fiscal year. And having the RFPs posted before then is certainly critical so that we can make the case for carryover of the budget funds. So we'll certainly have them posted, and in a good case scenario, we'll have them under contract before the business office kind of shuts down. So happy to sort of talk about the overlap with the measuring and assessing progress database, but I think I'll just pause and say, again, thank you for all the comments on the RFP, and really look forward to the engagement with the task group as we bring the contractor on board, and the role of that task group in reviewing the proposals and ensuring that we're getting the right vendor to manage the project and work with us closely. So look forward to sort of bringing the task group back together. But till then, happy to hear any further feedback on the RFP, or if folks want some time to do that still, please ask for it, and happy to accommodate that.
Jane, is when you talk about ADS potentially wanting to, the chance that they might want to develop like the data piece in-house, or at least the way it's displayed, would we then still contract for somebody to help frame out the not the IT system part of it, but really the approach and the methodology?
I would hope so.
Okay.
I don't think it's an all or nothing with IT. I think that
and the engagement, right?
Yeah. Okay. I just wanted to clarify that. Thanks. Any other questions on? Hey, Catherine, how are you? Sorry, we
Sorry, I was late.
That's all right. We got rolling. So, any other questions about the MBI RFP?
Nope.
Okay.
If we do have comments or questions, what's the best method for getting those submitted?
Yeah, please, why don't, if the full subcommittee wants to have a chance to review it, knowing if you're not on the task group, why don't we just say that I'm happy to take those comments directly for the next week? knowing that it's with ADS anyway. And if I need to circulate those back to the task group or share anything, if there's substantive comments, I will do that.
So by next Friday, Jane, they should get your comments. Okay. Okay, thanks. Should we go over to Marion? Oh, go ahead.
Before I turn it over to Marion to talk about the climate toolkit, I did just want to comment on the other RFP I alluded to and just say that the measuring and assessing progress database, I think there's going to be a critical role for this subcommittee to play in that as it moves forward too. That hasn't met as a task group since the climate action plan was adopted. The climate action plan, a task group from the science and data subcommittee managed that the task as an ongoing product from Cadmus and EFG, who was thinking about the framework for that database and tracking system. And so that went up to the council as a framework that was adopted in the climate action plan. And further work was done around developing a scope of work with the support of Cadmus and EFG. And so the RFP for that is largely based on that data, that framework that was included in the CAP. But just to highlight, that tracking tool, while focused on emissions and sort of the policy levers that drive emissions reductions, also has to speak to resilience and adaptation metrics, has to also speak to how we measure and track progress around the climate impacts and the impacts on wildlife and biodiversity. So it's a much larger tool that, mentioned in the statute than just a tool to track emissions reductions. And so just to draw your attention, science and data focused some of their nominations around for the new subcommittee membership around expertise in resilience metrics. And they have actually some nominations that would really help staff that subcommittee in that space, which would be great. And I also think that as we pull together a group to look at the RFP responses, it would be great to have someone, one or more representatives from this subcommittee who's interested in thinking about that database. And of course, Marion will be part of that group in thinking about her role and how she supports this subcommittee and how she thinks about the larger resilience and adaptation work of the climate action plan, but having other committee reps would be great too.
Thanks, Jane.
Are those new subcommittee members public yet? No, okay, thanks.
They haven't been selected yet, but the nomination, I guess, would technically be public. But
So
the
are you
recording
looking
yesterday.
Are you looking right now, Jane, for people to let you know if they're interested, or should they just follow up with you? What is your time frame here?
Yeah, I can follow up directly with the subcommittee via email as we start to move forward. But if you have an inclination now, that's great to hear too. But I will make sure to follow up with you all to gather interest as the timing is right.
Let's move on to the climate toolkit. Marion.
Yeah, I can provide an update and then folks who are involved in that work can follow up. Before I do that, I do want to point out Anne's comment in the chat, which I think is an interesting tie between the two. So Anne asks, will there be metrics for tracking the use of the toolkit and where would those lie? So I think, Anne, as Jane alluded to, that measuring and assessing progress database group hasn't met yet since before December 1st. So there's still a lot of question around the tracking of metrics and what those metrics are. But I will say that Jane and I have been pointing to a really interesting tool from the state of Colorado. And Jane, maybe we could post that in the chat. They have both a tracking tool that is, I think, something that Vermont's looking at as a helpful example. They also had an interesting webinar that talked about their tracking tool and how that speaks to and is different than their greenhouse gas inventory. But one of the components that they track is public engagement and sort of how folks are engaging with their tools and resources. And so I think that's something that this group broadly, meaning the Climate Council and those specific work groups, task groups, will think about is how do we fold in and think about public engagement metrics. And I think engagement with a toolkit would be one way to think about that. I don't know how we would track it besides like clicks on a website, but something to think about, and I think is is certainly an example in the Colorado tool. So we could share that with you all to take a look at. But great question. Okay, so the Climate Toolkit task group is one of the many task groups that is active right now. I think later on, I made a kind of busy graphic that shows all of the task groups that are engaged. There's actually a lot going on, not just in your subcommittee, but with other subcommittees and across subcommittees. So it would be interesting to talk through those and see if folks have questions broadly. But the Climate Toolkit task group has met a number of times now. We have great participation from a couple of folks here: Anne, Jens, Caroline, Ben, and we have Dr. Leslie and Dupigny-Giroux from the Science and Data Subcommittee, Karen Horn as well. So a couple of folks really involved in that work. And we have drafted up a project scope, which is posted on the website and linked in the agenda. And I'd encourage folks to take a look at that, but are really starting to think about the parameters and sort of the use of a toolkit, thinking about it as sort of a hub for existing resources and tools, primarily focused on municipalities, so paid municipal staff, municipal volunteers, boards, select boards, as well as the folks that help municipalities with their work, so regional planning commissions and contractors as well, and really trying to provide a hub for resources that connect across sort of the facets of climate action. The Global Warming Solutions Act really calls out those tools as focusing on financial resources for infrastructure, resilience and adaptation, but we're taking a bit more of a broad approach in thinking about how that toolkit is pulled together and really trying to help draw the connection for municipalities across, food security and hazard mitigation planning and all those different components of climate action that work is being done in and work should be done in the future. So we have drafted up a project scope, and the next step that the toolkit group identified was wanting to pull together a focus group of end users of that toolkit to really present some broad questions around where have communities done climate action work, where do they need additional resources and support, where have there been tools that they have liked to use, where are there tools that they haven't been able to find. And so we pulled together a group of, and I actually didn't do a head count, but I think about 18 folks on Wednesday night from 5 to 6 this week, and had a great conversation. I ran into some technical difficulties, but all in all, I think it went well. Had a great conversation with folks about what they're looking for in terms of resources, what they've liked and what they haven't liked, and really thinking through how we can focus the toolkit on really the feedback that we're hearing. We had, I have a graph here, I could show it. I just compiled notes from that event and shared it with the toolkit group, and I'd be happy to post them online so the whole subcommittee could see them. We had 4 folks who were members of conservation commissions or energy commissions, 3 members of planning commissions, 4 folks who are on their select board, 6 people who are sort of paid municipal staff, 7 representatives from planning commissions, and then 4 sort of folks who identified as other volunteers. So really a good cross section of sort of the audience we're thinking of for the toolkit. And I can talk about a couple of the key themes. I mean, I think, a lot of this is sort of capacity that we've talked a lot about in the subcommittee, and the need for financial capacity, staff capacity, policy capacity at sort of a municipal and a regional level. But really had some interesting discussion around what areas municipalities would like to do more work and haven't really either had the resources or the education to do so. There was a lot of discussion around sort of climate equity and justice, and how do we engage with and where do we find tools to help us think about engagement with our frontline and impacted communities? That was something that came up a lot, but a lot of folks were noting either verbally or in the chat that they're just not really sure how to get in with communities in their municipalities that are considered frontline or impacted communities. So that was an interesting takeaway. There were some folks from the city of Burlington who have done some pretty comprehensive planning around the steps that they need to take to meet greenhouse gas reduction targets, so the number of homes that need to be weatherized. And we're really sort of daunted by the number that they see. And we're saying that they're sort of struggling with how to approach that. Is it with financial incentives, or is it with sort of policy incentives? And how do they approach that and prioritize that work moving forward? And I think that's something the state's grappling with too. So had a lot of interesting discussion around there.
Marianne, just really, out of curiosity, yeah, what was the number of Burlington homes?
Oh, I'd have to go look. I could go find it though in the chat, because someone, they posted about it in the chat, so I could put it in here later once I
Was just curious how overwhelming that number actually was. That's all.
Yeah.
Thanks.
No, I can find it and put it in the chat for you after I finish up here. And then there was a lot of discussion really around the fact that folks would really like to see, and I think this was affirming for this toolkit task group, would like to see a collection of resources in one place that sort of connects those sort of buckets of climate action, both in terms of like data sets, specific tools for planning and outreach, as well as a list of financial resources and grants available at the state and other levels. So trying to think about how all that is pulled together into one sort of reference list or toolkit was a need that was identified during that discussion. So I think that was helpful feedback to have. So next steps for the task group is we are meeting on Monday to review the feedback from the toolkit. I will also add, and I'll put this in the chat after, for those who were not able to attend in person, we have a survey that has the same questions that we posed at the toolkit. We've received a couple of responses already, but I shared that with folks who weren't able to attend, but noted they wanted to provide feedback and could share it with the subcommittee to share with your networks, because the more feedback we can get, the better. So the task group's going to work through that. And I think our next steps are to really start thinking about how do we categorize resources, or how do we sort of want to present the toolkit? Is it based on the buckets of climate action? Is it based on financial policy, planning resources? So kind of diving into the design of that based on the feedback we've received. So good progress. I think we're lucky in a way that we are not looking to go out with an RFP or contractor for this. So we have a bit more time to think through this process, but it also means we're limited by what I can do with our website people. So those are some of the parameters we're working with, but looking forward to taking this feedback and moving forward. And so Jens or Anne or Caroline, happy to have you all jump in. I know Anne and Caroline were both on the call on Wednesday, so would love to hear from you all if you had other takeaways.
I think you captured it pretty well. I was happy to hear how many communities really wanted to pursue equity work, and how they really identified that their problem was that they weren't sure how to do that outreach. And I think that's something that this group could really figure out some tools to help with outreach and identifying communities and just the best ways of engaging people. So I think that's something that could really come out of it.
I think you did a good summary, Marion and Carolyn. It's daunting. People feel it's daunting.
Yeah.
And the fact that there was so many RPC people there was really good, because they are the frontline people who need to help. But, well, they're the helpers. They're not the people who actually have to do it. So there's a lot to be done.
Yeah, I think it was great. Happy to share the notes because I think it would be helpful for Municipal Vulnerability Index Task Group and others involved. And it does make me think, especially with the focus on equity and outreach, that maybe, and this is something I'll bring up with folks at the task group meeting on Monday, but how do we connect more closely with the Just Transition Subcommittee? We don't have anyone on the Toolkit group from that. Given the feedback on Wednesday, that may be something we want to reach out and ask folks for. So. And where did Mike go? Oh, there's Mike. I'm finding the number. I'll put it in the chat for you.
Marion, have you been in touch at all, or maybe even Erica, with Gary DeZiel from UVM? Okay,
No.
I'm going to make that connection. They're working on a hazard mitigation toolkit. So he got in touch with me, and I'm supposed to be meeting with him and a couple of researchers next week. I was hoping you would both say yes when I asked that question, but I will make sure I make the connection right after we're done this meeting.
Who is he with?
UVM, Sea Grant.
Okay.
Carolyn or Stephanie, does that name ring a bell to you?
A while back, a Sea Grant person had reached out to me, and so they were putting together a toolkit, and we had a conversation, like an hour-long conversation. So
Okay,
I haven't heard from
great.
them recently, but yeah, now that you're saying that, it rings a bell that we did talk about it.
Wonderful.
Yeah, I've spoken with him as well.
Great.
And I got some specific feedback from Alyssa with Wyndham Regional Commission after about some helpful resources from a hazard mitigation perspective that she would like to see. And so this is sort of, we're getting across the line of no longer is it existing resources, but what folks would like to see that doesn't exist. But if UVM's looking to pull together something specific to hazard mitigation, be happy to share that with him and with you as well, Caroline. So yeah, happy to have that connection made. So I guess if there's any questions or feedback, if after hearing all this exciting work, folks are interested in jumping in on the Toolkit meeting, we'd be happy to have you, but we'll continue to provide updates to the subcommittee as we move forward.
Okay, I think we can move on to subcommittee nominations. So would it be helpful, folks, for me to share my screen so you can see the nominations? Oh, Jens is big nod from Jens. Hold on just a second.
So in advance of this meeting, one of the things that we talked about is where we are missing some expertise and input on our subcommittee and seeking people who might be able to serve in those roles. We also recognize that throwing a list of names in front of you at a meeting may not be our best way of finalizing lists of additional people we may want to invite. So if after our discussion today, it makes more sense for Erica and I to take some time for more detailed conversation with some of these nominees or others, we're happy to do that and move forward that way.
Do we want to, before we dig into the names here, do we want to look at, there's a couple of questions that Marianne has posed in her email, which are, I can pull them up. What areas of expertise or lived experience would be helpful to add to the subcommittee? What voices you think have been missing? Which of the areas of expertise of lived experience should be a priority to add to the subcommittee? And I don't know that we've had that conversation or come to any kind of consensus around that. So I wonder if we want to start there, and then we can, based on the results of that conversation, look through our list.
Didn't we have a conversation near the end that it was water, wastewater, and the home building areas that?
You did have a conversation because we included those specific requests in the survey. So the question, it's under column C, which are the following specific expertise or viewpoints does this person bring? The list that we had there for rural resilience was from your conversation. I can put it in the chat or just read it out quickly. You all had rural local government for a small town, rural local government for a large town, housing expertise, smart growth, sustainable communities, resilience or other work with vulnerable and frontline communities, climate research, climate resilience and adaptation, someone who identifies as a vulnerable or frontline community member, and then youth representation, which we actually added later and can talk about in a bit. There's a proposal on how to better represent the youth in these conversations. So that was sort of the list that we took from a couple months ago before the survey went out.
That's great. Thanks for the reminder. I needed that. Okay, so I mean, there are what we have here? There's 8 nominations. So why don't we go down through them? Unless anybody has a different approach to how you want to go through the list. Okay.
I think it would be helpful to go through the list and just talk about what we know about these individuals, recognizing that based on that, we may not be able to narrow it down with this conversation.
Sure. So the first one is Val Story. It is a self-nomination. Rural local government member. Does anybody know? Looks like Ann Margolis and Jane have their hands up, but has anybody worked with Val or know of them? I'll start with Ann and then Jane and Ben.
Thanks. I know Val pretty well. I didn't know she was applying to be on our subcommittee, but I've worked with her at Clean Energy States Alliance. We worked together for at least 2 or 3 years, and she's a project director there. So she has experience working on the energy side of things. I haven't had experience working with her in where she lives in her current town, but she also used to live in my rural town of Corinth. So I would highly recommend her for her professionalism and expertise and probably the work that she would contribute to this committee.
Thanks, Anne. And it does say that she's from Underhill. Jane?
Excuse me. I wasn't first raising my hand to speak to Val, although I know her personally also quite well and think the world of her. So know that she would be an active member who would be able to contribute a lot. And so that's really valuable. What I was wanting to mention, just as you start to go through this and being mindful of Iris's nomination, is that in addition to the areas of expertise that you all highlighted as a group that you'd like to have join the subcommittee, something that we plan to bring to the steering committee the first week of April when they meet is a proposal from Iris that there be more broad youth representation across the council, and that she met with Marion and I and brought forward a proposal not only to think about her transition off the council in the coming months and how to support new representation as a council member, but that we should consider having a youth representative on all 5 subcommittees, and then thought about a framework to support those youth voices, which is a really great proposal and one that we feel really that the steering committee should and will likely support. And so just as you're going through these names, thinking about proactively pulling someone from a youth community on your subcommittee might be great, just to be proactive ahead of what we expect the steering committee will support also.
And we wouldn't even if the steering committee says that's an idea we can't support, we don't need steering committee approval to add a new youth member to our group, right? Okay.
Yeah, that was my point. You can do it anyway, and then you're covered.
Ben?
Oh, yes, thank you. Back to Val's story. I haven't spoken to Val in a few years and didn't know she was applying, but she was involved in the Green Mountain Club as a field crew member, and then as a board member, and as a volunteer member of a couple of different committees, including education and publications. And I hold her in the highest regard. I think she'd be a valuable addition.
Thanks, Ben. All positive feedback. So that's great. Sounds like a really, I don't know her personally, so that's appreciate it. Okay, so why don't we, I think that's helpful to go down through, ask if anybody knows this person or, has worked with the person in the past, and then kind of talk through additional folks that we would want to invite based on the areas of expertise that we were looking for. So the next one is Megan Rausch, also a self-nomination, bringing housing expertise and working with the Vermont Housing Finance Agency. Any familiarity there? From Northfield. Okay. Next is Alex Wilson, rural government, housing expertise, many of the subcategories. Founder of Building Green and the Resilient Design Institute from Dummerston.
I just a comment from a career long ago for me when I was 22 years ago or so. I worked at the Nature Conservancy here in Vermont, and he was on the board then. Okay. And so I know he's interested and was on the board of the Nature Conservancy. help start Black Mountain Natural Area, if people know that area, really special place in Emerson.
Thanks, Jane. The next two nominations are Iris's nominations of youth members. So Miriam Ermine, let's see. Trying to look to see, oh, here we go. Young student ensures that issues facing her community are addressed, passionate, incredibly astute. She is from Montpelier. And as well as Django Grace from Brattleboro. Similar accolades. Okay, I think we'll come back to those. These are very similar attributes to a young student I knew of one time. I'm kidding. But I mean, these are folks that, you know, it's really important to engage youth and folks that are want to be engaged at the high school level. And I'm really glad that we have a couple of really great nominations there. Okay, so the next one is Alice Peel, which is self-nomination. And working on managed growth for Waitsfield. Looks like housing, basically housing along with maintaining conserved land. Anybody know Alice Peel? Jens?
Yeah, I've worked with Alice quite a bit over the last 2 years. She serves on the planning commission there in Waitsfield. And they were working on a housing overlay district and then wanted to map habitat blocks. She's a volunteer force of nature, really incredible volunteer, and seems to really be able to connect the issues, you know, to move pretty seamlessly from housing to habitat blocks to wildlife. So I'd highly recommend her. It's been a joy to work with her.
Thanks, Jens. And then the last two, it's one nomination line. It's for two people. It's Jared Ulmer and David Grass, both with the Vermont Department of Health. And Jared is the Climate and Health Program Manager, and David is the Senior Environmental Health Program Manager. And they do a lot of work around health effects of climate. Go ahead, Marion.
I was going to flag, I think, so Jared had participated, I think, just not as an official subcommittee member, but as a staff support early last year, and had to bow out because of, he does work for the health department, so got pulled into COVID work. I think, and Jane, maybe calling you up, I know we had talked a little bit about state staff and how those nominations may be a little different because we could pull them in as staff support. I think we'll just want to think about that. I will also flag that in emailing with Jared and David, they're both really interested in participating in those particular task groups. So that could be one way to think about it, is perhaps just pulling them into task groups. Not as subcommittee members, but they'd also bring really good expertise.
So pulling them in as state staff and then bringing them to the task groups. Okay. So that's the end of the nominations, and I'll stop sharing the email. Stop share. The email from Marion that has that list came in on Wednesday. If folks need to look at it.
Erica, wasn't there another name on there? Shelley, I don't know her. I just thought we skipped over a name.
Yes, we did skip someone.
Sorry, we did. Yes, Shelley Podforth. And she is with Middlebury College, and is an architect. And oh, cool. She's got some interesting background for sure. Has anybody worked with Shelley before? Or know Shelley? From Sudbury. Okay. So what do folks think? Are there any names that jump out that say, you know, those are folks that we need to have engaged on a more regular basis? And I'll just jump in and start with probably our youth nominations. I don't know that we need to pick one or the other. If we can engage both of them, I think that would be great, especially because one's from Montpelier and one's from Brattleboro. So I think that's gives us, but you know, different perspectives.
Is there any limit to the number of people we can have on this subcommittee? Originally,
they wanted us to have, you know, 8 to 10 or 12. But that was really to try and manage the size of the subcommittees when we were doing the work for the climate plan. I don't know that we don't want to have it to be overly huge, but I don't have an issue with having a bigger group. But I'll leave that to Jamie.
Yeah, no, there's guidance that says 10 to 12 committees is 10 to 12 committee members. It makes the most sense, but that was prepared in the context of thinking about the development of the plan. That said, I think it's still sort of the guidance, and it was never a hard and fast rule anyway. So.
Sorry, but is this list, did this come from the original list, or these were all new nominations? They're all new.
All new.
Yep. I did share the original list with Catherine and Erica in case there were folks who wanted to do outreach too, but so I'm not sure if these were folks who nominated themselves again, but these are all new as of the past month or so.
I think Alex Wilson is the only name that is the same. He nominated himself the first time too.
Jens,
go ahead.
I don't know all the people on this list, so I'm not speaking from a place of knowledge, but it sure would be great to have additional town level representation, given how much this is about municipal capacity, and it is very difficult to get folks who are in a place in their lives where they can volunteer for this sort of work. So for that reason, I think Alice's nomination does strike me as important.
Yeah, and also to that extent, I think Val's as well. Just, you know, again, the fact that they're nominating and there are folks on here that know these folks and that they have been engaged in the past just is, I think it's very speaks volumes for the value of what they would bring.
Right, and if they've been engaged in the past and care enough to nominate themselves to serve on our subcommittee, that tells you something about their level of commitment to this idea and this work.
And the other one is, you know, Alex Wilson. That there's definitely he has a really interesting background from, you know, Southern Vermont. Dummerston's a really rural community. You know, I'd definitely be interested in hearing from him and having him engaged on the subcommittee as well.
Yeah, I like the expertise that he brings in resilience. I think that's actually pretty rare. I'm not opposed to anybody on the list. So I don't really know, you know, I'm not really sure how we make the decision here. And really, if you think about the way we've been operating, it's anybody that shows up as part of the decision-making process. So I don't know. I mean, is there any problem with just welcoming them all? I mean, it'll be a very big group. It's more people to manage. I mean, I think that's the only challenge, I think.
From my perspective, I think the only challenge that would add is making sure we have quorum. Just because quorum will be larger, but we'll have more people. So more people to combine to make the quorum. It's a balancing act. I think you're right, Joe, in terms of how we function, that we invite members of the public to participate equally. So sometimes we have 20 people involved in the conversation anyway.
Yeah, and I'm trying to think, we haven't, I don't know if we've even voted on anything. Or I mean, I guess, I don't know, have we taken any, official action when we were everything's been sort of by consensus, but I guess even that is, someone could challenge that, I guess, if they wanted to, if they would. I mean, it just seems like everything gets filtered up through the Climate Council anyway. So,
yeah, we chose recommendations to move up for possible funding. I think that's,
yes, that was one, yeah.
I think the other thing to remember here is that, our primary tasks in the immediate future, probably for the next year, are around the Climate Toolkit and the Municipal Vulnerability Index. So, we're talking about I think we chose the subject areas and the expertise that we needed to be able to support that. But given that scope of work, we may need to do some communication back to these folks. If we're open to everybody, we may need to do some communication back to them and say, this is what we're working on. Given that, are you still interested? Because we don't want to invite them on and have them think that the agenda is potentially bigger than it is. And we're pretty focused in the things that we're producing.
Erica, I think that's an excellent recommendation. Just want to echo that. I think you do have a very focused task work plan for the coming year, and asking them about that is sort of like a way of interviewing them about it.
So what do folks think about that? If we're open to all of these nominations and there's no concerns, then maybe Catherine and I can work with Marian, and we can kind of we can craft a standard message back to folks and say, we welcome your nomination, we welcome your engagement. Here's what we're focused on for the next year. Given that information, are you still interested in engaging in the committee? And just give them a little bit more information about how often we meet, things like that.
I think the quorum thing is a really good point. I think I would suggest we do figure out how to limit it to maybe just a couple more people. And I think you welcome everybody else to come and participate, and they can weigh in. It's that's how we've been operating. But having, how many people are we looking at adding here? There's 8 people. That's a lot of people.
Marian?
I just want to add one component thinking about, I think, Joe's recommendations are good, but being an official member of the subcommittee allows you to receive per diem for attending meetings. If you are not an official member of the subcommittee, you cannot receive per diem for attending meetings. So I think keeping that in mind from an equity perspective as you think about who to reach out to and who to ask to engage, their time, but also their ability to get financial compensation for this work.
I'll point out, we had talked briefly, and we can just come back to this, for Jared and David Grass. Maybe we're not talking about bringing them on as members, we're talking about bringing them on as staff support so that they can engage. So we're really only talking about, I still think we're talking about potentially seven people. I have a feeling that based on our communication back, we may whittle that down a little bit, but we would still be under, 20 people. And, given that we still meet regularly virtually and not as often as we used to, we may not have as big an issue with quorum.
Yeah, I think if you take off the 2 state staff folks, and then Erica and I and Mary work to do that outreach to folks to say, this is what we're doing over the next year. We may or may not lose a few based on that, and then we can see where we land in terms of who's still interested. And I think the biggest downside to everybody saying yes is that we have potentially challenging quorum. I don't think that's a horrible downside if we bring on great additional voices to our work.
Bronwyn?
Forgive me because I was not around when the subcommittee started, but when members are appointed, is there a memorandum of understanding or anything that they, like, are they aware that their attendance is needed to meet quorum? I'm just wondering if we just make sure people know that when they volunteer to come on, if that will sort of help manage it. And then obviously the question is, if people really aren't attending, is there any recourse that we typically take if folks are not able to attend consistently?
Yeah, I think we can, at a minimum, ensure that our communication to these folks and makes it very clear that attendance at the meeting is really necessary to ensure that we have quorum. And Marianne, I don't know if you can speak to how we address folks that are not regularly attending. The way I address it, I would reach out and say, if you can't fully attend, if you've got other things that are keeping you from the group, we, no harm, no foul, we can just take you off the list. And we can make sure that we can nominate somebody that, has that expertise and can engage.
Yeah, we don't have any official MOU that folks sign, but we do have recently developed an onboarding guide that talks about quorum and all the other components of being a subcommittee member that we'll share with new members. And I think are going to offer a training for new members as well, so they're fully understanding of sort of what their commitment is and joining. But I think to Erica's point, if someone's not attending, we just reach out and check to make sure they're still willing to commit. And if not, they can jump off.
Can you send that to everybody? Even the ones that have been around for a while? Thanks.
Okay, so I think what I'm hearing, and I just want to double check, is that there are no concerns about any of the nominations on here. We're open to everybody that was nominated. Our 2 state staff nominations, we will bring on as state staff instead of actual members. There's not much of a difference there, but they still attend. But it just controls the numbers for quorum. And Catherine and I will reach out with kind of a standardized message to all of our nominees, thanking them for their interest, letting them know what's on our agenda, and making clear what the commitment is and asking if they're still interested. And then we'll go from there. All right, great. Thanks. You know what? We were just lucky that we got so many really good nominations.
Yeah, I would say, rather than saying that no one objects to any of the names, I think I was pretty excited when I saw the list.
Yeah, we're pretty lucky. Great. So our next meeting, hopefully we'll have some new faces to introduce, and we'll make them go through their background and why they're interested. We won't haze them too much. Okay, so let's, go ahead.
One thing is what we don't have is anybody that doesn't believe in climate change, maybe. One of the meetings I went to anyway, we definitely had some people there that had some different opinions of this. And it just made me wonder if we all believe and agree on these things, if we're, really meeting everyone where they are. So just something to think about there. I don't have an answer on how to solve that, but just something to think about.
Can I follow up on that?
Okay.
There is no belief in climate change. It's science. We know what's happening. It's real. Are you presenting the possibility, Mike, of having enough counter intellectual stuff to our? I'm trying to understand like what your point is there, but I think it's just it takes the science away from the science when we say the word belief. So
that's what you feel, Jay. But if you've gone to some of the meetings that we even had, I think of one in Dorset, that, you know, not everyone believes the science, I guess is what I was trying to say.
Sure. No, I understand that. I just, anyone we put here, we're elevating their feedback and input too. So I don't want to elevate misinformation or give people a platform to, you know, speak against science. I guess that's my concern there. I understand the public sentiment and where those challenges are.
Bronwyn?
I guess I just wonder who would sign up for this group if that was what they were coming with, and how productive would that be? I do think in order to participate in a group like this, you do have to at least come. And maybe this is something, you know, this is something we do in public meetings all the time, is to say, here's our baseline. We're not debating whether it's true or false. Our baseline is that it's happening and we need to do something. And I just, you know, I suppose if we could find somebody who thought differently about what exactly we should do, that's fine. But I do feel like, one, finding the person who doesn't think we should do anything at all, I don't know how useful, I don't think they would feel comfortable in a group like this. They would be completely overshadowed. So, you know, I feel like the purpose of this group is to say, there's general agreement that something's going on. We're trying to figure out what to do about it in a way that works for all those people who may not be prioritizing it the way that we do. And so that's, I think, the purpose of the group. If we have dissenting opinions, if we have people thinking that, you know, there's a different way of taking action, that's fine. But, you know, someone coming in and say, take no action, I don't know how useful that would be at the end of the day.
Anne?
Thanks. I'm not worried about belief versus science on our committee. I'm not even that worried about it in terms of the work that needs to get done and the people that we need to reach. What I am worried about is how it comes up as a priority. And I think, you know, we heard a little bit about that from, well, myself, I'm a terrible whiner in the focus group, and also from another person who just like, how can we possibly do this? There's just too much. But that's the purpose of the toolkit. So I think we just have to go forward. And if we put the emphasis, it's almost like we need people who are effective community organizers, you know, as another skill set, in addition to their, you know, that big list of issues like transportation and energy and housing and that we added, that we worked from. That's all. Thanks.
Thanks, Anne. Caroline?
So just kind of.
Oh, did she just blank out for everybody else? Okay, I think maybe her internet cut out or something. So we'll come back to her. I think
Going a little bit more back to. Does it work without my camera on?
Yeah, it works better without your camera.
Okay. I just wanted to say that not necessarily someone that's a climate denier, but I see the value in having someone that is coming from the perspective, you know, I think everyone's heard a lot of people say that they're concerned about the cost of this, like transitioning heat pumps and that sort of thing. And even within my own household, that's what some people have been bringing up. And I think that once everything is totally launched and this is really impacting the public, that's going to be a reality that we're dealing with. So it's not climate deniers, really. It's just people who are worried about the financial costs and how this affects them, that perspective would be really, really great to have part of the conversation all the way through so that it could reassure other people with that perspective.
That's a good point, Carolyn. That's kind of the conclusion I was coming to too, is, you know, we're not necessarily looking for people that I think wholesale are deniers. I think we're looking for folks that differ on opinion on the best way to prioritize some of these actions and how to execute them. It's not really the what that we need to debate. It's really the how to be executed. You know, there are lots of differing opinions out there on building codes. There are lots of differing opinions out there about how much land we should be conserving versus developing. You know, so there's you know, it's having that diversity of perspective. I think it is important.
And maybe the answer is our job is to meet them where they are and have those conversations. It doesn't necessarily have to be here. That's what we've done where I've experienced that before, and that's what we can continue to do. But I do, you know, yeah, maybe that's the answer.
And I'm glad you asked this question, Mike, because I think it was a good conversation to have. I think where I come down on this is, if you're going to be an official member of this subcommittee or any subcommittee of the Climate Council, you need to be willing to support the Global Warming Solution Act and the Climate Action Plan that was just adopted. And if you can't do those things, then this isn't the place for you to be officially elevated as an official voice of that entity. Our meetings are open to the public and we welcome participation. So there's definitely ways to participate in other methods. And I appreciate where you landed about meeting people where they are in terms of those questions. And I see Jay has posted information about the backlash against science as a real global threat.
But I mean, it was a good discussion.
Yeah, I'm glad you asked the question.
Why don't we move over to legislative updates? That's the next item on the agenda. We'll start with Jane. If you have any updates to provide, I have one, but and then we may have some others from other members of the subcommittee.
Happy to. So I'll put in the chat. For folks who hadn't seen, at the last Climate Council, we were on the agenda to discuss related bills that were active in the legislature that were focused on or came out of directly recommendations in the Climate Action Plan. And in preparation for that, we've compiled the list that I just dropped in the chat that links to all the relevant bills and bucketed by likely to see action this session versus other ones that have come up but are not less likely to see action. And so I'll just comment on a few and then open it up for folks who are on this call to speak in more detail about some of them, the ones that you're engaged in. But first, for folks' interest, at the top and kind of overarching is in the governor's budget bill, the big bill. He did increase base funding to the Agency of Natural Resources in support of the development of a climate office. And so that was a recommendation in the Climate Action Plan, not necessarily to sit in A&R, but to support a climate office. The climate office, Marion, if you have access to it, or I can do it in a minute too, but there is a white paper about the roles and responsibilities as we thought about to have the governor support this increase in our budget. So there's the responsibilities of that climate office will largely be threefold. Implementation of the Climate Action Plan as relative to A&R's responsibilities, measuring and tracking progress across all sectors in this space, and then community engagement relative to buy-in and equity work. And there are new positions and reallocation of existing positions to meet the roles and responsibilities outlined in this white paper. And this white paper is just a first start. We're cautiously considering what the roles and responsibilities will be, mindful that the budget hasn't been approved yet, and this would go into effect July 1st. So that's one big highlight in the base budget, and that's
And I'll
moving
just-
through.
Oh.
Go ahead.
I'll just add that I did provide Jane feedback already on the white paper to suggest that it would please me if resilience had a more prominent role in the climate office. So I just wanted you all to know that I did submit that feedback.
Yeah, just it does, for folks, does envision one of the 8 positions to be a resilience and adaptation program manager, who would be largely in charge of that work, as well as the measuring and assessing progress and data people would be considering resilience and adaptation metrics.
Hey, Jane, if it goes through, how many people would be in the climate office total?
There'll be 8 of us. There are 5 existing positions in A&R that will move into the climate office and 3 new positions.
Okay.
So Marion and I will move into the climate office. It's envisioned 2 positions from DEC and 1 position that's an FPR.
Okay.
And then 3 new positions. So we're excited about that. Hopeful, cautiously optimistic. I should say that there'll be a technical advisory committee too, appreciating that A&R controls actually relatively little of the space of climate action work, and a lot of it falls to Erica's agency, AOT, PSD, and that really the role of A&R will be helpful in coordinating how we track and measure that progress in service of other agencies, and hopefully convening a voice, a state conversation about the role of state government in the space and policies and measures needed, but not necessarily doing all the work, mindful that a lot of other organizations do it as well. So that's that. The ARPA budget is also linked. I think folks have seen the governor's ARPA budget, and we've talked about it here in the past, but those ARPA dollars are making it through the legislature now. In addition to the regular ARPA dollars, there's also a really exciting proposed for capital ARPA dollars for municipal resilience centers that Marion's been helping track for Julie, for our secretary, that speaks to the development of using public spaces in municipalities to set up resilience zones. So that's another, outside of the regular ARPA dollars, another ARPA project. And all of those, weatherization, fuel switching, all of that is making its way through the legislature now. As far as bills that are directly out of the climate action plan, obviously the sort of front runner big one is the clean heat standard. That was the primary emissions reduction measure in the buildings and thermal space, and really the biggest policy lever that was put forward in the climate action plan period for emissions reductions. And that did pass out of the House and is now with Senate Natural Resources and Energy. It had a wide margin of support in the House, so folks are hopeful that it will make it through the Senate. One of the big considerations in that space was that the governor and some folks in the legislature wanted to see it come back to the legislature after the PUC designed the clean heat standard over the next 2 years. That amendment didn't make it into the bill, and that is some question about the administration support of the bill now, but mindful that it had a pretty big gap of support in the House, so hopeful things will move forward there. The environmental justice bill is not directly, didn't start because of the climate action plan, but is a priority from the climate action plan, saying that fundamental infrastructure to support environmental justice is needed broadly in the state. That bill has less certainty, I would say, in where it's going right now because of a JFO review of what it would cost for state government to stand it up. And the cost is quite high, and they're not sure where the funding would come from. And so there are discrete components of the EJ bill that are being talked about to maybe pare it down and move components of it forward, but not the whole thing. And there's Act 250 legislation. There's changes to UVA to support old forest around resilience metrics. That's really great. There's a 30 by 30 goal that talks about conservation and a bill in that space. a lot. There's the transportation bill that has a lot of great stuff to reduce emissions in transportation sector. There's a housing bill. There's a lot of focus on climate in the legislature this year, which is really exciting. And some things will likely get passed and some things will see another session. So I'll pause there and let others speak to more details, like Joe, if you want to speak to anything in the transportation bill, more details of that, or Act 250, others, or I know Jens, you helped testify for the 30 by 30. So yeah, let us know.
Go ahead, Ben.
Jane, you touched on it lightly, I think, but it's noteworthy that the general fund budget has $8 million for non-FEMA match for hazard mitigation projects, and the ARPA capital bill has,
It's
no,
not
did I
capital.
get that wrong? Can you, no, the capital bill has 14.75
I don't
million.
think it's the capital bill. I don't think it's the ARPA capital bill. I think it's just
What is-
it's just the regular. It's not capital. But there's 14.75 million.
Yeah.
In the governor's climate package that
Oh,
would be
there we go. Okay.
funded through ARPA. That's been included in the big bill, which is great. The governor's original proposal for non-federal match for federal hazard mitigation projects was 10 million. It was reduced to 8 million in the House version of the big bill. But that's 80% good news, as Ben says, and we'll make good use of it. So appreciate any support that folks can lend to those two items as they're moving through. Thus far in the Flood Resilient Communities Fund, which is where that additional $14.75 million would go to. Just in the first year, we've had a little under $5 million available for application, and we have seen $11 million in applications, and so there's plenty of interest, and some really, really exciting projects. Projects that we're going to be able to move the needle on and do hazard mitigation just really swiftly. I mean, these are projects that there are life safety issues that are posed, and we're going to be able to move them very, very quickly. And it's just been really impressed by the work of Stephanie and Carolyn and Lisa Kolb and Ben to review. And we have a great program review committee as well. That's a multi-agency committee that's been working hard on these, and I think we're putting a lot in front of them for scoring and everything. But I think these are folks that are very passionate about this work, and it's going very well. So hopefully we can get the rest of the money and put just about $20 million towards hazard mitigation out of the American Rescue Plan Act. So that's great.
What she said. Thank you.
Sorry, Ben. Any other legislative updates that folks want to share? Okay. Well, thanks very much. That's good info. With that, we can move into public comment. Do any of the members of the public on the meeting today wish to share some comments? No. Okay. Any other closing items, ideas, comments, questions that folks have?
When is our next scheduled meeting? We should remind folks of that.
April 22nd, just looked it up.
I'll make sure it's on your calendars.
I am. I think. Okay, good.
Oh.
I'll be able to provide an update on the on ResCon, because I'll be going to ResCon in New Orleans that week and acting as one of the opening plenary speakers for the panel, which is exciting. So
that's very exciting.
Yeah. yeah, it talks about climate resilience. It also talks about, you know, infrastructure, cyber. So it's like big umbrella resilience. Marianne?
I just wanted to flag, and maybe Jane wants to give a bigger update. Should we highlight the two public broad engagement events that are happening the week of April 11th? So I can provide a bit of detail. So there's one of the many task groups is a group under the Just Transition Subcommittee that's really focused on continued public engagement. There's sort of a three-pronged approach that they're taking with support from us and with A&R and CBI. The first is around continued engagement around the plan. So that has components around translation services for the CAP, building out a story map, as I think Jane mentioned earlier. The second component is broad public engagement. So hosting two big online public engagement sessions around the climate action plan and hearing from folks about that and talking about the work that's moving forward. Those have been scheduled and I think shared with the full council and subcommittees, but just highlighting them here for you all. The first is on Tuesday, the April 12th at 6 p.m. and the second will be Wednesday, the 13th at noon. And they're posted on the website and there's a Zoom link to register. So please do share that with folks. And then the third approach that the task group is looking at is really targeted engagement with organizations that are working closely with BIPOC, Indigenous, rural, low-income Vermonters. And we've identified a couple of organizations that we're reaching out to have conversations with to start think about how do we really build long-term relationships and connections with those organizations that work on the ground in those communities. So that's all moving forward, but wanted to highlight the two public engagement events that have been scheduled.
Thanks for highlighting those, Marianne. Mike?
I just wanted to say that April 22nd is school break week.
Oh, it is, right?
So I actually won't be able to be here that week, sorry.
And we may not need to meet because of the timing of where everything is at. I don't know if Marianne.
Yeah, I mean, we could go to May. Do you want to do folks? Well, first, maybe we move our date to April 29th and just put it on as a hold in case we have something. And then if we don't, we can always move it out to May.
Obviously, I know I don't need to, it's okay if I miss a meeting, but I just didn't know if a lot of people didn't realize it was school break week, that's all.
I forgot, so thank you for reminding me to put it on my calendar, and you are not the only one for whom that impacts.
Nobody tell my husband that I'm gonna be gone for 3 days during school break.
We'll let you break that news.
Yeah, okay.
Okay, so we're going to move that one to the 29th. I can do that right now.
Thank you. Awesome. Any other items from folks? All right. Have a wonderful weekend.
And a great school break. Take care.